Good morning. We have a wonderful subject that I'm going to be talking about this morning. I hope you enjoy it. Sensitivity and the aura. Most of us think we're sensitive. And yet the teaching says, well, maybe not so much. Maybe our sensitivity is more reaction. What are we reacting to? But today, I think you're going to be excited about what you're hearing, what you're learning, going to learn. Maybe you already know these things about truly what sensitivity is. And of course, this is all from the point of view of the teaching. So I welcome you here this morning. I hope you've had a good week, and we're delighted that you've taken your time to join us. So let me begin. The mechanism of our senses, our sensitivity, is the aura. Now, we can also use a different term other than mechanism. We can use the term device, because this is a more modern term. Back in the day, when we talked about the physical and emotional and mental and spiritual bodies, they were all called a mechanism. And this is a mechanism that the personality and the soul uses. But also now, since devices like our iPad and our cell phone and our Mac Pro and all the, I don't use Mac, but anyway, I like the term device. It's more modern. So we could say the device of our senses, our sensitivity, is the aura. So whether it's a mechanism or the device, it is the recorder of sensitivity. And everything that is recorded in the aura. So our aura is a device. Isn't that interesting to consider? Our aura is a device. The aura is the electromagnetic force field around our physical body. And it's formed of four kinds of substances. The aura is formed of four kinds of substances. The etheric, these are terms that will be familiar to you, but maybe from a different point of view. Etheric, emotional, mental, and some intuitional substances. Let me repeat this again. The aura is formed of four kinds of substances. That's our aura, everybody's aura, but really a human aura, not an animal aura. The animal aura does not have four kinds of substances, but the human aura does. Etheric, emotional, mental, and some intuitional substances. So sensitivity is the registration of various impressions of these four elements. Sensitivity is the impression of various impressions of these four elements, these four kinds of substances which compose the aura. And I'm going to repeat this so that the talk later on will make more sense to you if you remember this. Sensitivity is the registration of various impressions of these four elements or four substances. And these four substances compose the what?
Aura.
Oh, thank you. Okay. They compose the aura. So the emotional, mental, and intuitional bodies make up a sensitive film, right? It makes up a sensitive film around our body. It's called an aura. And it registers certain impressions from objects, but also from people. Whether the objects and people are close by or far away. The aura primarily registers people's emotions, their thoughts, their motives, their aspirations, their states of consciousness and beingness. Again, I'm going to repeat this so I'm sure you're paying attention. The aura, this is the aura now. This made up of how many substances? Four substances. The aura primarily registers people's emotions, people's thoughts. The aura also registers people's motives, their aspirations, also their state of consciousness and their beingness. If the person's aura is sensitive, and this is a key, this is a rule, if a person's aura is sensitive, they will have these impressions. Emotions, thoughts, motives, aspirations, state of consciousness, and beingness of other people and objects. So the quality, the degree, the purity of the registration depends upon the purity of these elements, these substances, the purity of the etheric body, the purity of the emotions, the mental body and intuitional bodies. So, for example, the teaching explains that if a person is 80% emotional and 2% mental, their registration is going to be what? It will primarily be emotional, very little mental. Now, if the four substances, the etheric, the emotional, the mental, and some intuitional substances in the aura are balanced in percentage, and this is a key phrase. If these four substances are balanced in percentage, then the person's registrations will be balanced. See how that works? For example, we look into a nice mirror and the reflection is beautiful, it's accurate. But if we look into a mirror that is concave, the image is distorted. A balanced aura is like a mirror that receives impressions and then transmits them to the brain, transmits them to the nervous system. So the brain, the mind, and the nervous system translate these pieces of information or these impressions to the same degree of accuracy as it was received. So if we're looking at a concave mirror, then our registrations will be distorted. But if they're in balance, then they'll be clear and accurate. So it is important to balance these elements, to balance the etheric body with the emotional body, with the mental body, and some of the substance of the intuition. If the intuitional element is dominant, the speed of impression, figuratively speaking, will be about 50 times faster. The degree of registration will be about 50 times faster than the registration of the mental, emotional, or etheric element. Isn't that interesting? The elements in the aura can be balanced when the person decides to do something and then follows through emotionally, mentally, intuitively, knowing what they are doing. Such a person is not driven by emotions. They're not dominated by their mind. They are not dominated by their heart. They are not dominated by intuition. They are a balanced human being. They're not too much mind. They're not too much heart. They're not too much intuition. They are balanced. Those substances are balanced. When the four elements are balanced, the impressions received are registered clearly and instantaneously. There's no, well, let me think about it. Impressions received are registered very clearly and instantaneously. So balance is required for correct registration. Now, what is the device that is registering all these impressions? Yes, it is the aura. Okay. Purity of all four elements are also required. Purity of all four elements are also required. If the person has an etheric or physical illness, their registration is not going to be clear. If their emotions are full of difficulties, such as hatred and jealousy and revenge and malice, and so on, their registrations will always be agitated. They will not be clear. If the person is emotionally upset, or someone says something beautiful to them, they cannot accept it because they cannot clearly see the intent. Their registrations of impressions is not complete or clear. So it's very important to remember, and there's so many examples I could share, but there's no time this morning. This, to me, this subject is so vital to our understanding because it helps us to build right human relations. It helps us to strengthen and improve our communication and understanding with one another. So, for example, if we are doing our best in communicating with someone, and that someone becomes irritated or agitated or screaming and yelling at you, you'll understand why and not take it personally. See, their aura is not registering the impressions clearly because those four elements are not yet purified. So it's like looking at that convex mirror, everything is distorted. If the aura is not pure, the translation of impressions will be distorted. So the mental conditions that create obstacles to clear registration are vanity, ego, prejudice, and so on. If a person wants to express their love to someone, but that someone is prejudiced against them, that love will be translated as an attack. For example, a mother-in-law tells her son's wife how much she loves her and is so grateful that her son married her. But the daughter-in-law is jealous of her and translates that love as a lie, as an attack. Do you see? It is so difficult if the aura is not pure. If the aura is not pure, the translation of impressions will be distorted. The person receives love, but because of the distorted mechanism of their mind, they mistranslate the love given as hypocrisy. Another factor is the health of the person's nervous system. If their nervous system is continuously agitated, their registration will not be correct. They may be brilliant and highly intelligent and have many degrees. Those little letters, after the name of the graduate. But if their nervous system is continuously agitated, the aura will not register the impressions correctly. There are hyperactive people who are always nervous and negative. Sounds easily startle them. They cry or easily become depressed. They are simply nervous wrecks. These people cannot receive impressions clearly because why? Their sensitivity is dulled and confused. Now this next point is very interesting, that impressions do not only register from people or objects, we also receive impressions from heavenly beings. And they are everywhere. They are always sending us impressions. But because our instruments of reception are out of order, the heavenly beings cannot impress our mechanism. We cannot register the messages coming from them. They're there. We just can't register the impressions given to us. So we must make our nervous system tranquil and calm if we want to engage in higher work. Even if we are writing a letter, talking on the phone, going to an important interview, or conducting a business transaction, the best advice is to calm our nervous system. Calm our nervous system. In this way, we can understand what is being said, how we're receiving it. We can understand what is being said and what our responses are going to be. We will receive subtle impressions that bypass behavior or language. We're going to receive subtle impressions that bypass behavior or language. This is very interesting. I know that some parts of society, particularly psychologists and some philosophers, are, for years and years, they have taught body language. And I know that this one young man, he was being interviewed for a job with a bank. And he did get the job, but the job was based on, that interview was based on one thing: body language. And everything that entails, how the person dressed, how they sat, how they spoke, the tonality of their voice. Experience played a part, obviously, but the key was that body language. And throughout his job, body language, everybody that knew about the criteria and the importance of body language in those high positions, you better know that they learned very quickly. Well, I saw that as an introduction to the bypassing of behavior or language. It's like they're getting the idea that it's more than what the person says, but it's more subtle than that. And when our aura registers what's going on, we register those subtleties, meaning we don't analyze. And that analyzation then determines our prejudice and opinion about what that person is saying. So impressions will bypass any imitation. The impressions will bypass any imitation or cosmetic cover-up and clearly touch the receiver's heart. The receiver's heart would be the one with the sensitive device. It is important to have this ability in our lives because we then have right direction and right relationship with each other. This is esoteric science. This is so important to those who are shaping themselves, those who are on the spiritual path, those who are trying to educate their soul and to find right direction and right human relations, and to help the planet and to help humanity evolve. But it takes time, it takes effort, and it requires sensitivity. That means that it's not just our intelligence that defines and determines our relationship with one another or our understanding with one another. When you are around someone who has these 4 substances not only clean and purified, but to develop to a very refined sense, you're not going to understand them. Why? Because you're going to translate that individual according to your level of development. But impressions bypass any imitation and cosmetic cover-up. Another factor in receiving clear impressions has to do with the health of our brain. Sensitivity cannot be accurate if our brain is polluted by things such as tobacco smoke, insecticides, and other such poisons. Lots of coffee and black tea, drugs such as marijuana and LSD, or an excessive amount of physical work that depletes the body means that the health of our brain will be negatively affected, and thus our impressions will be distorted. Pressures and worry, especially worry, interestingly enough, damages our brain. Pressure and worry damages our brain. And our sensitivity then cannot be accurate. So it's important to pay attention to the brain and make it calm and healthy and happy. Alcohol is very damaging to the brain. Even if intelligent, the person will register nothing but astral communications because of their drugged state. There is a difference between sensitivity and feeling. Feeling is registered by the emotional body. Feeling is registered by the emotional body. Sensitivity is the registration of the impression of the entire aura. It's the difference between feeling and sensitivity. Sensitivity is the registration of impression by the whole aura, whereas feeling is the registration of the emotional body. The measure of the expansion of your consciousness is also very important. So let us say that you have a nice aura and that these 4 elements or substances are in balance. You have a nice aura, the substances are all in balance. There is purity and tranquility in your aura. You have a healthy nervous system in your brain. So you have purity and tranquility in your aura, you have a healthy nervous system and brain. All of these elements may be working well, but if your consciousness is only operating on one level, all the impressions received will be translated at that level. If your consciousness is higher and more expanded, the impressions will be translated according to the level of your beingness, the level of your consciousness, the level of your sensitivity. If you receive a sensitive impression from someone and your consciousness is totally self-centered, you will translate and use that impression entirely in selfish ways. And obviously for selfish motives. If your consciousness expands into group, if your consciousness has the ability to expand into group consciousness, you're going to take that impression and use it for the group, for the nation, or even for the globe, the planet. So a person, here's a formula, a person is able to receive impressions and translate them to the measure of the dimension of their consciousness. Okay? So these 5 factors, balance, purity, a healthy nervous system, a healthy brain, and expansion of consciousness make sensitivity operate and register beautiful things. Balance, purity, a healthy nervous system, a healthy brain, and expansion of consciousness. See how simple this is? Hey, it's not cosmic science. It's so simple that it's outrageously difficult to live. If you feel something odd that is happening to you, and you do not know exactly what it is, chances are you are receiving an impression. If your intuition is advanced, if you have a certain amount of intuition and it's advanced, you will be able to locate where that impression is coming from and to what degree it is safe and or dangerous. Safe or dangerous. Is this impression safe or dangerous? Not all impressions are safe. If you have developed some of your intuitional substance, the substance of the Buddhic body, then you're going to be able to determine whether that impression is safe or dangerous. If your intuitional element is really charging your aura, you will feel impressions coming from higher sources and translate them into lectures and music and writing and so on. The intuitional element or substance is very important in our aura, right? I mean, we can imagine this now. We really know this now. It's very important. Clairvoyance, advanced, not lower astral clairvoyance, but advanced clairvoyance, say that when the intuitional substance begins to flow into our aura, it creates a golden flame in that aura. And it becomes very magnetic to impression. When the intuitional element increases 60 to 70%, it is then we are able to control that sensitivity. And this is a very important phrase, 60 to 70%. That's when we're able to control our sensitivity. The time comes when the disciple is so sensitive to glamours and feelings and depression and so on, that if someone is depressed, they feel depressed because they are soaking it up like a sponge. If the disciple feels it in their solar plexus, they become unhappy because they do not know what to do. They are feeling the emotions of their friends and family members. This obviously is a very difficult stage in discipleship. And it has a term to it. The teaching calls it the dark bridge. The dark bridge. What's happening now is that the disciple is beginning to register in their aura the ills of humanity. They hear bad news on the television, and for 3 or 4 days they fight with everyone. If that person will examine the cause, they're going to find it's because they were so negatively impressed with the TV image. They were being a sponge for the dirty water of others. Sensitivity not only consists of thoughts and emotions and motives and consciousness and beingness, but it also incorporates other impressions. For example, you approach an object, and then you feel as if, I don't want to get close to it. Or sometimes people who are nervous and irritable can touch someone and make that person feel their irritation. Sometimes when we go to the movies or to other public places and sit in a chair, if we do not feel comfortable, we may find ourselves moving to another location. We do this because, why? Our aura is registering impressions. See, the aura is becoming so sensitive. Someone cooks for you and you do not eat it. This is also sensitivity registration. Maybe someone asks you to take a walk and you're not happy about doing it. Sometimes you force yourself, and this is an important point, perhaps. Sometimes you force yourself against your own registration. And you take certain actions. This creates problems because your aura is telling you it would not be good to be with a certain person. But your mind, the mind is forcing you by saying, so what? I'll guard myself. But you will always lose when you follow advice that is opposed to the registration. So let me stop a minute here before I go on. Do you have any questions?
The science of balancing your aura, or purifying your aura, how is that related to the idea of direct knowledge?
They're not related.
They're not related?
No. It just, they are in fact, Richard, related, but it's not related to the talk this morning. Okay. See, first of all, we have to understand what straight knowledge is. Do you know what straight knowledge is?
No.
Right. So, if you don't know what straight knowledge is, then why is purity important? See, what is the relationship of purity to straight knowledge? But we could understand that straight knowledge is the opposite of that concave mirror, right? Otherwise, it would be crooked knowledge. Okay, I'm sorry. But I mean, it's trying to help us get this image to understand. So straight knowledge is knowledge given to us that is not analyzed, that has no prejudice, that has does not cause opinions. It is the result of knowledge that is correctly registered in the brain and then used consciously. Okay. So it doesn't, straight knowledge does not depend on the level of sensitivity of a person. By increasing, are there any other questions? Nothing? By increasing the intuitional substance in our aura, listen, this is so important, because now we're moving beyond those 3 or 4 days of negativity, of depression, or of fighting. Now we're going to move beyond those difficult experiences, because the intuitional substance in our aura is increasing. When it increases, then we are less likely to react to the negativity of others. This is where spiritual discipline comes in. All the disciplines listed, and there are hundreds of disciplines listed in the teaching of Agni Yoga. As we begin to practice these disciplines, starting with control of our thoughts, right? Only starting with the control of our thoughts, this is one of the ways, one of the factors that the intuitional substance begins to increase. It's just one of the ways. There are many factors to consider. So when the intuitional element increases, your sensitivity increases 1,000-fold and becomes very clear. It becomes very clear. It's no longer touchy. You're no longer reactive. This person has more control now over what they receive. But see, this is not, you can't pretend. You cannot pretend, which to pretend means that you are taking, typically you're taking your emotions or even taking your feelings and you are compartmentalizing them and saying that you're in control. But that is fantasy. If you've ever kneaded bread dough, you put the yeast in there and you put it in the sun for a while, and then you have to punch it down, and you punch this down here and it comes up over here. You punch this down here and it comes up over here. That's what happens when the person says, I'm in control. What they're doing is that they are, I know there's a term, it's like quick freezing. It's like you're taking this this instrument that you have and you're spraying some kind of chemical on your feelings or on your emotions, and it freezes it and it drops down into the subconscious mind, and there it stays for a period of time. When the intuitional element increases, a person's sensitivity increases 1,000 times, becoming more clear. Now they have more control over what they receive. But if their intuitional element is equal to another person's element, which are in a negative state, they receive everything but have no control. The negative state is what causes you to have no control. Control is the moment in which the disciple passes from discipleship into initiation. Control is the moment in which the disciple passes from discipleship into initiation. An increase in the intuitional element gives us more control because it is more sensitive to our human soul. Now we are more sensitive to our human soul when there's an increase in the substance of intuition. So intuition is an increase of light, and it's an increase of control. This is very simple. If you're sitting in a dark room and someone turns on 10,000 volts of light, you can now see everything, right? The process is not mundane, but universal. So even so, an increase in intuition directs a person, directs us in our mundane life. In the teachings, we're taught about how important it is to have direction, right? See, that's like a hint how important it is to have direction. Well, how do you know if you're going the right direction? You may have direction, but it may be taking you down the wrong road. Now we're understanding that the more substance of intuition we have, the more right direction we have. The more right direction the human soul has. Universality includes all that exists. The more light that we have, the better we are able to live our daily life. Sometimes people confuse sensitivity with the kinds of astral impressions that they received when taking drugs, for example. Alcohol and hallucinogenic drugs open a person's astral centers, and they begin to communicate with astral entities. And they think they're psychic. They think they are sensitive. They think they are advanced. And so they give their prophecies, to an individual or to a group or to a world. And the world is so impressed until this prophecy leads the world or the individual down the wrong path, in the wrong direction, or just never comes true. It is true that marijuana and drugs were once tools for spiritual development. Their usefulness depends on the level of consciousness of humanity. When a person's consciousness is stuck just above the animal level, the dosage of drugs used with the scientific observation of a great master can boost that person's consciousness a little bit. But at the stage in which we find human consciousness today, using drugs is totally a poison. In the higher ashrams, drugs are totally forbidden. For example, 2 million years ago, I know most of you are familiar with this story, but I'm going to say it anyway. 2 million years ago, Hatha Yoga was good. But today, at our stage of evolution, Hatha Yoga is very dangerous. In 1976, a large conference was held in India, we are told, by many advanced yogis who reached the conclusion that Hatha Yoga should only be practiced by prescription and that only 1 or 2 asanas would be prescribed. So various techniques have helped humanity during various stages of human evolution that are now obsolete. They are now obsolete. If we survive on this planet and the great ones begin arriving, now here's our future. We will live only by the sun's radiation. It's going to put Safeway out of business. Just as certain computers are now powered solely by solar solely by solar energy. The human body is the best assimilator of light if it is purified. This is sensitivity. The teaching tells us that someday we will eat our lunch by going out into the sunlight, doing a few special exercises, and then inhale the solar energy. That energy will be converted into a form that will nourish and heal and fuel the body. We will not need food as we know it today. This will take a little time, but this will be our future if we clean this planet and we clean ourselves. We already have instruments that are transforming solar energy into other forms of energy. If we can create instruments that are powered by the sun's rays, what about the creator of those instruments? People can transform themselves into a purified condition to receive and use light energy. Yogis can sit on ice and turn that ice into hot water in just a few minutes. As human instruments become more refined, we will not need to pollute it with elements that we have already surpassed. So, to summarize, the obstacles of sensitivity: we must avoid mental and nervous disorders, emotional turbulences, heavy desires, negative emotions, mental worries, illusions, vanity, ego, guilt feelings, and destructive ideas, destructive plans. These distort sensitivity. If we harbor destructive plans in our mind, these plans are going to distort and disfigure the impressions that we receive as an individual, as a group, as a humanity. Mentally, we will not receive the mental aspect of the impression. Instead, we're going to receive the emotional and etheric or physical part only of that impression. This is what? It's an unbalanced reception. So sensitivity will eventually put us in contact with the guiding and creative forces of nature, enabling us to cooperate with them. Sensitivity increases when we gain control over our habits and mechanical actions, when we exhaust our glamours and dissolve our illusions, when we no longer act under the pressure of our self-interest, when we keep our thoughts pure and lofty, when we create a field of service, when we develop humility, and when we develop compassion. That's when sensitivity is going to put us in contact with the guiding and creative forces of nature.